As a child, I spent countless summers exploring the vast woods behind my grandparents' farmhouse. Those early years were filled with adventure and the kind of freedom that only exists in childhood. My cousins and I would build forts from fallen branches, create imaginary worlds, and dream up grand futures for ourselves, completely unaware of the real challenges adulthood would bring. When I was 14, my family moved to a bustling city, a stark contrast to the rural life I had known. The transition was jarring, but it exposed me to new opportunities. I joined the school debate team, where I discovered a talent for persuasive speaking and a love for problem solving. These skills would later shape my career and personal life in ways I couldn't have predicted. During my final year of high school, a tragedy struck. My closest friend, Mark, was involved in a car accident that left him paralyzed. His resilience and determination to rebuild his life inspired me profoundly. I volunteered at the rehabilitation center where he was treated, an experience that taught me the value of empathy and perseverance. In college, I pursued engineering with a focus on renewable energy, driven by a desire to create something meaningful. My dorm room often resembled a laboratory, cluttered with prototype models and sketches. One of those prototypes, a compact solar-powered battery, earned me a scholarship and set me on a path toward innovation. It was during this time I realized that success was not just about ambition, but about creating solutions that mattered to people. By the time I reached adulthood, my life had become a careful balance of work, ambition, and lessons learned from my past. And now, standing on the precipice of a new chapter, all those experiences felt like threads weaving into the tapestry of this moment. At 3:30 p.m. on a Friday, I found myself counting the minutes nearing 50. I was about to marry Jane, the most stunning woman I had ever encountered. Jane, being a traditionalist, had chosen to spend the previous night with a longtime friend from her college days, ensuring we kept the ritual of not seeing each other before the big day. I was on my way to my study to review the wedding arrangements when I heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. "All right, forgetful one. What did you leave behind this time?" I called out, descending the stairs. At the bottom, I froze. A woman with a Mediterranean tan, dressed in an expensive suit, stood there smiling. Despite her tight skirt and heels, she ran toward me with open arms. "Kevin, I'm back," she said. She leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head, and her lips landed on my cheek instead. Grabbing her arms, I pushed her away. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Her expression shifted between hurt and defiance as she answered, "Kevin, that's no way to greet your wife. This is my home. I've come back. You're not my wife, and this isn't your home," I shot back. "This is my house, and you don't belong here." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked to the lounge, hoping to calm down. She followed close behind. "I thought you'd be mad," she said, her voice rising, "but this is too much." Ignoring her, I grabbed a card from the table and dialed the number on it. "This is Kevin Bryant," I said into the phone. "Yes, she's back. My ex-wife, Lisa. She's here now. Please come quickly because she won't be staying." Lisa's eyes widened as she asked, her voice trembling. "Who was that?" "Detective Inspector Maynard," I replied coolly. Her face paled. "The police? I didn't do anything wrong." "Maybe not," I said, meeting her gaze, "but they think otherwise." I called my son, Elliot, explained the situation, and asked him to come over. Turning to Lisa, I said, "Sit down. People want to talk to you." It had been 6 years since Lisa left. I still remembered her note. "Kevin, I'm leaving to find my true destiny. Don't waste your time or money looking for me. You won't succeed, and I won't change my mind. I hope life treats you well and that you forgive me someday. Yours truly, Lisa." She didn't even handwrite it, just printed it from my computer. Lisa and I had been high school sweethearts. At 18, I joked about becoming a millionaire by 30. For her, it wasn't a joke. Even in college, she was the girl everyone admired but waited for a millionaire. After finals, she announced she was pregnant. Though unexpected, I planned to marry her eventually, so I figured why not now? I accepted a job at a small firm, Danvers Electronics, because I believed I could make an impact. Lisa wanted me to aim higher, but I chose stability for our family. Bob Danvers, the owner, supported us, helping us find a flat and covering the deposit. My salary went toward preparing for Elliot's arrival. Lisa thrived during pregnancy, and within months of giving birth, regained her stunning figure. At 5'8", with chestnut hair and striking blue eyes, she looked as radiant as ever. As family life progressed, we bought a house with Bob's help, and my career took off. Bob promoted me to lead the design department, doubling my salary. Lisa enjoyed spending it. To prepare for emergencies, I set aside 10% of my income into savings, though Lisa still saw a boost in our joint account. By 30, we had a detached house in the country, 2 cars, and a comfortable life. But when I mentioned our success, Lisa said, "You always said you'd be a millionaire by now." It hit me that she never understood it was a joke. Our biggest conflict was over Elliot's education. Lisa pushed for private school. I thought public was fine. One day she said, "If you'd gone to private school, you might be a millionaire instead of working for a small electronics company." I replied, "That company pays for this conversation. Without it, we wouldn't have the choice." She countered, "If you loved Elliot, you'd give him every advantage." Lisa won. Elliot went to Kingswood for $6,000 a year. The fees weren't the worst part. It was the socializing. Lisa gravitated towards stockbrokers and bankers, while I struggled to fit in at their events. That's when everything began to fall apart. Lisa admired the luxurious lives of the people we met, while I resented them. One afternoon, standing by the patio doors, she asked, "The garden looks great. What made you redo it?" After 2 weeks of police and diggers tearing it apart, it was easier to start over, I said. "Police and diggers? Why were they here?" she asked, confused. "Looking for you," I replied bluntly. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Detective Inspector Maynard and WPC Cavendish stood outside. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bryant. Is she still here?" Maynard asked. "She is. Follow me," I said, leading them to the lounge where Lisa stood. "Inspector, WPC Cavendish, this is my ex-wife, Lisa. Lisa, meet Inspector Maynard." Lisa's shock over the garden faded as Maynard asked for her ID. She handed him her passport, and after verifying it, the questioning began. "Where have you been for the last 6 years?" Maynard asked. Lisa hesitated. "Can't this wait until we're at the station?" "This isn't the right time." Maynard was firm. "I think your ex-husband deserves answers after everything he's been through." Lisa glanced at me, pleading. "Kevin, I know you're upset, but this doesn't help." "I'm not angry you left, Lisa. I'm angry you came back, especially today," Maynard pressed on. "Where have you been?" "We went to France, Spain, and Barbados before returning to Spain. Now I'm home," she said. "This isn't your home," I countered. Maynard asked how she left the country, noting no records of travel under her name. Finally, she admitted, "A friend flew me out in his private plane. We left from Farnborough and landed in Nice. As rain poured outside, I tuned out the conversation, reflecting on when our troubles began. It started when Elliot entered private school. Lisa craved a lifestyle like the other parents, luxury vacations and a home and bath, while I focused on saving for the future. Arguments grew frequent, but we always reconciled, until one day we didn't. The breaking point came at a dinner party. Henry, a hedge fund manager and the father of one of Elliot's friends, bragged about his bonuses after drinking too much. He outlined a scheme involving a small company in Farnborough that owned valuable land. "We'll buy the company, transfer the land to a holding company, and evict the factory when it defaults on rent," Henry explained. "Then we sell the land for housing at 30 times what we paid." "And the workers?" I asked. "Casualties of business," he said smugly. "You're a blood-sucking fool," I snapped. Henry swung at me, missed, and fell into the table, ruining his suit. Lisa rushed in to see the commotion. "Grab your coat, Lisa. We're leaving," I said. It was my last dinner party. Lisa continued attending, claiming to go alone, though I doubted it. On Monday, I told Bob, my boss, about Henry's plan. Together, we bought the factory at a fair price, ensuring the owner got a better deal and saving the workers' jobs. A month later, Lisa exploded. "You embarrassed me in front of my friends and ruined Henry's deal," she yelled. "Henry's bonus versus 100 workers' livelihoods." "Easy choice," I said. "You make everything so hard. I'm trying to elevate us socially, and you ruin it," she snapped. "It could have been our father's jobs Henry destroyed. Have you forgotten where you came from?" I asked. "I haven't forgotten," she said bitterly. "I just don't want to go back." That moment marked the beginning of the end. Lisa resented my modest success, and I realized she was ashamed of me. Our relationship fractured further. She threw herself into socializing and school committees, while I buried myself in work. That year, I gave in and took Lisa to Juan-les-Pins for a summer vacation. She spent her time parading in front of yachts, hoping to spot celebrities, while I stayed with Elliot. It was our last trip together. The following year, I wanted to try skiing, but Lisa refused, insisting on warm winter holidays. From then on, Elliot spent summers with her and winters with me. We drifted apart. By the time Elliot left for college, we lived separate lives under the same roof. He followed Lisa's advice and studied business, later joining a management consultancy. His choices reflected her influence more than mine. In those final years with Lisa, troubling stories about her behavior began to surface. Even my boss, Bob Danvers, mentioned seeing her in questionable company, and my secretary would grimace whenever Lisa called. Whether she still loved me or not, it was clear she had no respect for me. When I came home one night to find her gone, I felt more relief than sadness. "I still don't understand how you didn't know we were looking for you, Mrs. Bryant," Inspector Maynard said. "The search and your husband's arrest were all over the news." Lisa turned to me, shocked. "They arrested you. Kevin, I'm so sorry. I left a note." "Yes, a printed, unsigned note," I replied. "No one believed it." Maynard pressed her further. "Mrs. Bryant, it's hard to believe you didn't hear about the search. It even made the foreign press." "I was abroad," Lisa said defensively. "I didn't speak the language and only saw local news in French." "And you didn't care," I added bitterly. Lisa looked at me, resigned. "You're right, Kevin. I didn't care. We hadn't connected in years. You hated my friends, and I wasn't interested in your world. But I never meant to cause you trouble." At that moment, WPC Cavendish returned with a piece of paper. "Lisa, is that your Range Rover outside?" Maynard asked. "Yes. Why?" "It's linked to an ongoing investigation in Spain. Passing away at a bordello in Malaga," Maynard explained. Lisa turned pale. "He died in the girls' room. It had nothing to do with me. The autopsy confirmed it was a heart attack." Maynard nodded but added, "The Spanish police weren't happy that you left the country before the case was closed." "I had to get away," Lisa admitted, glancing at me. "Kevin, you were right about those people. They use others and discard them." Maynard sighed. "We'll need a statement, but this case is closed for now." After escorting the officers out, Maynard shook my hand. "Good luck tomorrow, Mr. Bryant." I closed the door, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. While I missed aspects of life with Lisa, the house had felt emptier since she left. Even arguments leave a void when they're gone. The next day, I visited the bank. I canceled Lisa's credit cards, removed her name from our accounts, and took her parting words to heart. "Don't try to find me." I didn't, but 10 days later, Elliot called, distraught over his mother's disappearance. He insisted on filing a missing person report, bringing Inspector Maynard into my life. Maynard seemed skeptical of my indifference. "Why didn't you report her missing?" he asked. "I don't know where she went, and I don't care," I replied honestly. Maynard investigated, but found no leads. Lisa hadn't been seen by local taxi drivers and wouldn't have taken a bus, something she hadn't done since we married. The press latched onto the story, camping on my lawn and shouting questions about Lisa's whereabouts. Maynard later arrived at my office with a search warrant. He wanted to search my home, impound my car, and bring me in. I handed him the keys, but he arrested me anyway. "Kevin Bryant, you are under arrest for the suspected homicide of Lisa Bryant," he said, cuffing me. "You have the right to remain silent." Following Bob Danvers' advice, I said nothing without a lawyer. After 2 days in custody, my solicitor challenged the lack of evidence, leading to my release. Outside the station, reporters swarmed me, yelling accusations as cameras flashed. When I returned home, I found the property taped off as a crime scene. The garden was torn apart, the patio destroyed, and police were digging in the yard. Inside, the house was unrecognizable. Carpets were ripped out, floorboards removed, and belongings were scattered everywhere. A police officer stopped me. "This is a crime scene. You can't be here. This is my house, and I live here," I said. After radioing his superiors, he grudgingly let me pack a bag under supervision. I took photos of the chaos as I packed. The bedroom was the worst. Clothes thrown everywhere. Drawers emptied. With a suitcase in hand, I left for a hotel. The next morning, tabloids plastered my face across their front pages, one headline reading, "Getting Away with Homicide." Furious, I thought, they'll pay for this. At work, I walked onto the factory floor to unexpected applause. The clapping grew as I reached my office. Turning, I gave a theatrical bow, drawing laughter. My secretary, Sally, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "I knew it wasn't true," she said, setting coffee on my desk. Minutes later, Bob entered. "Good to have you back, Kevin. The lawyers filled me in. How are you holding up?" "My house is a wreck," I said, showing him photos. "Print those," Bob said. "I'll send them to the lawyers. They can't call it a crime scene without proof of a crime. You'll be compensated. Where are you staying?" "A hotel for now. I'll look for a short-term rental this weekend." "Nonsense," Bob replied. "You'll stay with Wendy and me until we find you something. Remember, you've got friends here." As I headed out for lunch, Sally called after me. "Kevin, Bob wants me to help you find a place. Do you want a flat, a bed and breakfast, or would you consider renting a room?" "I haven't decided," I admitted. "Well, my Aunt Helen rents out rooms and doesn't have anyone staying right now," she suggested. "Would she be okay with a homicide suspect as a tenant?" I joked. Sally laughed. "You're no butcher. I'll call her and set it up." That evening, I met Helen Warrender. In her early 50s, but looking closer to 40, she was 5'6", with striking blue eyes, dark hair streaked with gray, and a welcoming smile. Her home was cozy, and the double room she showed me was perfect. After hearing my situation, she said, "Sally told me everything. The way they treated you is appalling." Her kindness won me over. Living with Helen was a welcome change from life with Lisa, except for the lack of closeness, which didn't last long. One evening, Helen panicked over a broken toilet. I fixed it quickly, and her gratitude turned into a hug, a kiss, and eventually a night together. The next morning, she was remorseful. "Kevin, last night was a mistake. It can't happen again." "But it was good, wasn't it?" I asked. "It was, but I have someone. He won't sleep with me until we're married, and I couldn't resist after so long." "I'll never push for anything you don't want," I promised. Despite her protests, we shared 2 more nights during my stay. After more than a month, the police finally released my house. It was in ruins, damaged floors, ripped carpets, and a garden that looked like a battlefield. Repairs took another 2 months. I replaced the furniture, reset everything, and restored a sense of normalcy. When Lisa reappeared, she walked through the house, her eyes scanning every detail. "This looks different. Definitely not your style," she said, her tone curious. "I had to renovate," I replied, my voice edged with frustration. "The police tore it apart. They even checked under the concrete for your body." Her face went pale, and she staggered back slightly. "I never thought it would go that far. I'm so sorry." "It's done, Lisa," I said, meeting her gaze evenly. "We're divorced now. We can move on." Her expression shifted to confusion. "How can we be divorced? I never signed anything." "You didn't need to," I said sharply. "Abandoning me was enough." Once I moved back in, I started divorce proceedings to sever ties with Lisa completely. My lawyer explained the options: pursue all joint assets or set up a trust fund for half, allowing Lisa to claim her share later if she returned. I chose the slower route to protect my interests. Not long after, Maynard summoned me for questioning, suspecting the divorce as a motive for Lisa's disappearance. With no evidence of foul play, I was released but faced another press frenzy. Back home, I focused on redesigning the ruined garden. Despite my projects, I felt alone. Joining dating sites, I attracted attention but was often met with thinly veiled questions about Lisa. Casual hookups were easy, but finding someone to share my life with wasn't. Curiosity led me to explore no-strings-attached arrangements. One profile stood out repeatedly, an 18-year-old named Jane, refreshingly upfront about her intentions. Her profile read, "I've just started college, and tuition fees are eliminating me. I'm not looking for luxury, just enough to avoid a job. In return, I'll be exclusive to you. If you're married, I'll be discreet. No one-night stands or short-term flings." Her honesty intrigued me. After resisting for a while, I contacted her, telling myself I wanted to ensure she wasn't taken advantage of. We met at a campus cafe. As I waited, I spotted her immediately. Tall, slim, with striking brown eyes and shoulder-length hair. She brought a petite blonde friend, Abby, who eyed me suspiciously. "Hi, I'm Jane, and this is Abby," she said, extending her hand. Abby stepped back and snapped my photo. "Hi, I'm Kevin. Can I get you both something?" I asked. Jane ordered coffee and Abby asked for water. As we sat down, Jane seemed confident while Abby glared at me. "You passed the physical," Jane said with a playful smile. "I could go through with this." "Good to know," I replied. "But why am I here?" "Are you married?" Jane asked. "I can be discreet." "It's not my wife I'm worried about," I said. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Jane's expression hardened as she glared at me. "Is that why you're here? To lecture me?" She stood abruptly as if to leave, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I'm not here to lecture," I said calmly. "I just wanted to be sure. Now, what do you need from me?" She hesitated before placing an invoice on the table. It was for her university housing fees, modest compared to what Lisa used to spend on shoes. I glanced at it briefly, then reached for my checkbook. Without a second thought, I wrote a check for the full amount payable to the university. Jane's eyes widened as she watched me. "You're really doing this for me?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Yes, I replied, sliding the check across to her. And I'll cover next term too, but there are conditions. Cancel your ad and stay exclusive. Her head bobbed in agreement. Of course, she said quickly. Good, I continued. I'll also cover your food, books, and next year's tuition. In return, focus on your studies and make yourself available for events when needed. Abby snorted. That's an interesting way of putting it. Ignoring her, I asked Jane, do we have a deal? We do, she replied, locking her big brown eyes on me. I offered to take them to dinner, but Abby bristled. I'm not part of this arrangement. I know, I said. This is my way of thanking you for looking out for Jane. As we left, they noticed my modest Skoda. Jane hesitated. Kevin, can you afford all this? I laughed. I live by my needs, not my means. This car is practical and leaves me money for what's important. And I'm important? She asked. I hope so, I said. You'll cost me far less than my wife and son ever did. Over dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Bath, Jane opened up about her family. Her father, in his 60s, had a second family to support, and her mother was nearly 20 years younger. They lived modestly in Doncaster, where Jane grew up. Her father had instilled a strong aversion to debt, telling her, borrowing is just paying someone for having more money than you. I admired her upbringing, even if it had led her to risky choices. Her parents believed she worked at a campus bar, unaware of her arrangement with me. At the end of the evening, we exchanged numbers and I dropped them off at their dorm. Although I felt foolish, I wasn't naive. The next day, I hired a private investigator to verify Jane's story. I didn't think she was lying, but I wanted certainty before getting more involved. Over the next 2 weeks, Jane and I saw each other a few times a week. We had dinners, went to clubs, and spent time together. I was becoming attached, but waited for the investigator's report to ease my doubts. Jane, however, had other ideas. One Saturday, I planned a special evening. We started with shopping for a new outfit, followed by dinner at one of my favorite restaurants and a night at a booked nightclub. Later, we checked into a hotel with separate rooms. At her door, I leaned in to kiss her cheek, but she turned, meeting my lips. The kiss deepened, and she cupped my face in her hands. We need to talk, she said softly. We could go to your room, but I'd rather stay here. She led me inside, poured us wine, and said, Kevin, I'm grateful for everything, but I thought we had a deal. We do, I replied. Have I broken it? Not exactly, but you're not letting me hold up my side. You've treated me more like a daughter than a girlfriend. She unzipped her dress, letting it fall to reveal her lingerie. I already have a father. I don't need another one. I've just been cautious, I explained. I didn't want you to feel like... A hooker? She interrupted. If I were one, others would choose me. I chose you. This is my decision. I'm just worried, I admitted. You're 19, I'm in my 40s. What happens when someone younger catches your eye? That won't happen, she said, climbing onto my lap. I want a mature man. I want you. Her words melted my hesitation, and we ended up in bed. Her youthful energy was exhilarating, a sharp contrast to my past experiences. Afterward, we showered and fell asleep, spooned together. The next morning, I woke to her kiss, which quickly led to another round of closeness. Later, I returned to my room to change for breakfast. As we left the hotel, her arm around my waist, we looked more like lovers than the father-daughter duo we'd resembled when we arrived. On Monday, I got the investigator's verbal report. Everything Jane told me checked out. She had no romantic ties at university, and some even assumed her friendship with Abby was romantic. Relieved, I closed the case and asked for the bill. Feeling motivated, I asked Sally about the company's gym discount and booked a session with a personal trainer. Sally noticed. What's brought on this sudden fitness kick? She teased. I figured I could use some work, I replied. You're not in bad shape, and not that old, she said with a smirk. Then her face lit up. Oh my God, you've met someone. Kevin, I'm so happy for you. She kissed me impulsively before stepping back, flustered. Let's keep this between us, Sally, I said. It's early days. Any woman who lets you go is either mad or stupid, she said confidently. Well, thanks, I said with a grin. I'll try not to let it go to my head. Sally left, beaming, and I wondered how long it would stay a secret. At Danvers, the business had grown significantly. We had shifted to digital signal processing, with licensing becoming our most profitable sector, a reflection of my department's success. Bob, now in his 60s, was stepping back, and we had started hiring 2 graduates annually to bring in fresh talent. One afternoon, as I returned from the gym, still sweating from the workout, Bob walked into my office. He took one look at me and chuckled. Looks like you're training for a marathon, he joked. Just 3 miles, Bob, I replied with a grin. What's up? He leaned against the doorway. a playful smirk on his face. Your mileage expenses, they're getting out of hand, he teased. They're legitimate, I said defensively. I don't even claim the short trips. Bob nodded. I know, but the company should get you a car, something with a little more prestige, not a Skoda. There's nothing wrong with a Skoda, I countered. Sure, but it doesn't exactly scream success, he said, raising an eyebrow. You need something like a Merc, Jag, or BMW, especially when you're acting CEO. I blinked, caught off guard. Acting CEO? Bob grinned. Wendy and I are taking a world cruise after Christmas. You'll be running things while we're away. We'll discuss your long-term role when we're back. He straightened and headed for the door, tossing a parting instruction over his shoulder. Now, get online and pick a car, up to 80 grand. 2 weeks later, I picked up my Jaguar XK. I didn't mention it to Jane, who was spending most nights at my place. The first time I arrived at her university in the new car, she didn't recognize me until I stepped out. Well, I teased, does this prove I can afford you? You silly man, she laughed. You didn't get this just for me, did you? No, Bob insisted. It's a company car, I explained. He must think highly of you, she said, admiring the interior. It's mutual, I replied. So where to tonight? I don't care, as long as I'm with you. Can we just go home and relax? That moment made me realize how comfortable we had become. She didn't need grand gestures. Just being together was enough. For the first time in years, I felt truly happy. But the peace didn't last. One evening, Jane wasn't at our usual meeting spot. Concerned, I searched her dorm and then the theater bar, but there was no sign of her. Frustrated and worried, I returned to my car, only to find Abby sitting on the hood, arms crossed. Abby, I called out, startled. Where's Jane? Is she okay? Before I could say more, she slapped me across the face. Why didn't you tell us who you really are? She snapped. Jane's heartbroken. I told you, I'm Kevin Bryant, I said, confused. Yes, she shot back, her voice sharp with accusation. That Kevin Bryant, the one accused of homicide. Where's your wife? I don't know, I admitted, my voice tightening. She left. Abby glared at me, disbelief in her eyes. Then why can't anyone find her? A reporter told Jane everything. About you? About how women are drawn to butchers? She defended you, Kevin? But then he showed her the headlines. Furious, I snapped. I don't care what they say. Lisa left me. I deserve a life, and I want Jane in it. Driving home, I tried calling Jane, but her phone was off. I sent her a text. It's not true. Lisa left me. Please talk to me. The next morning, angry and exhausted, I called our company lawyer. Guy, I want to sue the police, the press, and especially the Post. They've ruined my reputation. Guy sounded eager. I've been waiting for this. Leave it to me. By the next day, the story had broken, and my house was surrounded by reporters as I stepped outside. Microphones and cameras were thrust toward me, voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. Mr. Bryant, are you suing the police? One journalist called out. Yes, I replied firmly, for failing to verify their facts. Another voice quickly followed. What about the Post? Are you really asking for £1 million? They've baselessly branded me a butcher and interfered in my life, I said, holding my ground. If they have evidence Lisa is dead, I'd like to see it. I got into my Jaguar and drove off, feeling vindicated. At work, Guy called to praise my impromptu interview with the press. While unintended, it felt good to know someone was on my side. That night, I watched the TV coverage of my statement. Most of the commentary was positive, and it was followed by a segment on press intrusion featuring others who had suffered similarly. 3 days later, the Post offered a settlement. No apology, no admission of guilt. I declined. Winning mattered more than settling. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I spotted someone huddled outside in the cold. It was Jane. I immediately wrapped her in my arms and brought her inside. After making coffee, I sat beside her, noticing her nervous but relieved demeanor. I'm sorry, Kevin. I don't know what to say, she began. How about I explain everything, I said. I recounted the entire ordeal, leaving nothing out. By the time I finished, her coffee was cold and she was in tears. I wrapped an arm around her as she leaned into me. I should have talked to you, she admitted, but that reporter scared me so much. He'll regret it, I reassured her. He should, she said, her voice filled with conviction. The things he said were awful, and the lies, how did they get away with it? When I saw you on TV demanding evidence, I realized I'd been wrong. Abby said you were heartbroken, I replied gently. I was, she admitted, her eyes meeting mine. I really like you, Kevin. It's not just about the Zex. It's everything. I want to be with you, but I was so scared. After she calmed down, I made dinner and we spent the evening quietly together. Before bed, she asked, "Kevin, would you come home with me for Christmas? I want you to meet my parents, especially my dad." "I'd love that," I said. That night, we held each other close, making love with a tenderness that felt like a fresh start. As Christmas approached, Jane moved into my house. She suggested it to save on her student housing costs, and since she was already staying most nights, it made sense. I insisted she take Elliot's old room to have her own space if she needed it. For transportation, I let her use Lisa's old Mini, which had been sitting unused in the garage. The drive to Doncaster was smooth, the Jaguar gliding effortlessly along the roads. After a couple of brief stops, we arrived in the evening and pulled into a hotel parking lot. Jane glanced around, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Why are we here?" she asked. "My parents will be upset if we don't stay with them." I turned off the engine and looked at her. "I booked a room as a backup," I explained. "Your dad will be thrilled to see you, but meeting me might be a different story." She hesitated before nodding. "That's probably smart." After checking in, she helped unpack, glancing around the room with a grin. "This place has potential. Maybe we should come back and test out the bed." We then headed to her parents' cozy home on the edge of town. Her father, Derek, greeted us warmly. In his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a friendly demeanor, he hugged Jane tightly. "Dad, how are you?" Jane asked. "Good, darling. And you? You look well. And this must be Kevin," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome. Jane's told me a lot about you." Inside, Derek led us to the kitchen where her mother, Linda, waited. Slim, blonde, and about my age, she gave me a much cooler reception. Her eyes skipped over Jane and fixed on me. "And who's this?" she asked sharply. "Mom, this is Kevin. We're living together," Jane replied. "Living together or sharing a bed?" Linda shot back. "Jane has her own room," I said, offering my hand. Linda ignored it, her expression skeptical. Derek offered drinks and we chatted over coffee. Derek's warmth was evident, but Linda remained frosty, eyeing me with suspicion throughout the evening. The visit went smoothly until a year-in-review program on TV featured my legal battle with the press. Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, you're him! You're Kevin Bryant, the man who got away with homicide!" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm Kevin Bryant, the man whose wife left him." "The Post says you liquidated her. There's no smoke without fire," she said coldly. Derek stepped in. "Linda, they had no evidence, and he asked for proof. They couldn't provide any." "You knew," she exclaimed. "And you let him stay here?" "Technically, Linda, it's my house, and I'm happy to have Kevin here," Derek replied. "I don't want to cause trouble," I said, standing. "It's best if I leave." As I packed upstairs, I heard Jane say, "If Kevin isn't welcome, neither am I." Derek apologized and promised to try calming Linda, but Jane met me at the stairs with her suitcase. We left together. She kissed her dad goodbye, ignoring her mother's protests. Back at the hotel, Jane and I tested the bed, sharing some of the most passionate closeness we'd ever had. The next day, I invited her parents to dinner at the hotel. Derek came alone. Linda refused. That set the tone for our future. Derek remained supportive, while Linda stayed distant and distrustful. We never stayed in Doncaster again, though I ensured Jane visited her father regularly. Derek and I grew close, and when I invited Jane on my annual ski trip, Derek encouraged her to go. We spent 2 idyllic weeks in Closters at a client's ski lodge. Jane, eager to learn, quickly picked up skiing and insisted I teach her. By the end of the first week, she was confidently tackling intermediate slopes. Though I suggested exploring the lively après-ski scene in Davos, Jane preferred quiet evenings by the fire with me. The trip brought an unexpected surprise when a royal family visit attracted the press. Jane didn't understand why I found it ironic, but I couldn't help thinking of Lisa's obsession with mingling with the elite. Here I was, inadvertently vacationing alongside royalty without any effort. Back home, while Bob and Wendy were on their cruise, I handled client meetings and events. Jane joined me, effortlessly charming guests with her warmth and intelligence. Her background in business and corporate law gave her insights that impressed everyone. While some whispered about the age gap, it didn't bother me. Clients valued her as much as I did. When Bob returned, he invited us to dinner. Over the meal, he shared his vision for the company's future. "Our manufacturing side doesn't generate much profit," Bob began. "Your design and development division is driving our revenue. Just your last project alone makes more in a week than manufacturing does in an entire year." "Are you thinking about shutting down production?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, but expanding it isn't practical." Instead, I want to invest more in design and development, especially in DSP chip technology. I'll scale back to working 3 days a week and oversee manufacturing. You'll take the lead on design and development, with a salary increase, of course." On the ride home, Jane curled up against me, her fingers gripping my arm tightly. "Did I hear that right?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement. "My man is now running most of the company?" I glanced at her with a grin. "If by your man, you mean me, then yes." "That's amazing," she exclaimed. "He must really trust you." "I do my job well," I teased, pulling her closer for a kiss. That night, after another successful client dinner, Jane and I celebrated passionately. Her pride in me was clear, and her enthusiasm left no doubt about how much she admired me. The police eventually compensated me for the damage to my home and reputation, and the Post begrudgingly settled for £500,000 along with a hollow apology. The money felt tainted, so Jane suggested creating the Kevin Bryant Bursary for engineering students, which we did. With Jane now living with me, I covered her tuition, fulfilling our arrangement and ensuring she stayed debt-free, despite her initial protests. For me, paying her expenses was a constant reminder of our agreement and helped me brace for its eventual end. By spring, I was in the best shape of my life. Regular exercise and healthy eating had worked wonders, and even my assistant Sally took notice. "That young lady of yours is working miracles," she remarked one morning, eyeing me with a knowing smile. "Really? How so?" I asked, intrigued. "You look 10 years younger," she said with a wink. "If that's what a younger partner does, I'm finding myself a toy boy." I laughed. "It's the exercise and diet, but Jane does inspire me." "Well, whatever it is, keep it up," she said, her tone softening. "We were all worried about you these past few years." "Don't worry. She might go home for the holidays, though, so grumpy me might make a comeback." Sally grinned. "If she's smart, she won't leave you alone for long." Later, over dinner, I brought up the holidays with Jane. "So, what are your plans for Christmas?" I asked. She thought for a moment, then asked, "Does Danvers hire holiday workers?" "Yes, mostly engineering students." "Why?" "I want to stay here and work," she said. "I can't handle more than a week with my mom after Christmas." "I'll check for openings," I said, impressed by her initiative. When I mentioned it to Bob, he was surprisingly enthusiastic. "We need to start training office staff as much as engineers," he said. "Have Jane apply, or better yet, skip that. I'll have Mrs. Pritchard set up a program for her." That summer was blissful. Jane and I spent our days together, both at work and home. I bought us bicycles, and we often rode to country parks with picnic baskets in tow. I shamelessly enjoyed the view as I followed her on the trails, admiring her perfect curves. By October, when she returned to university, it was hard to see her go. In July, Danvers launched its first DSP chip, which became an instant hit. Lacking production facilities, we partnered with manufacturers to license the design. Telecom companies quickly realized the chip's potential and flooded us with integration requests. The success boosted revenue, and we transitioned fully into a knowledge-based business model, developing innovations and earning royalties. Despite my thriving career and happy personal life, my relationship with Elliot remained strained. He rarely spoke to me, and when he did, it was usually to air grievances. Rumors of his engagement reached me, but I doubted I'd be invited to the wedding. One evening, I overheard Elliot on the phone, his voice sharp with frustration. "Do you even understand the damage you caused, Mom?" he demanded. "You disappeared without a word. What did you expect? People were bound to be suspicious." Lisa's reply was defensive, her tone rising. "It wasn't my fault. Your father and I didn't have a relationship anymore. He didn't even look for me." "Of course he didn't, because you left," Elliot shot back. "I even wondered if the police were right about him." There was a pause, and when Lisa spoke again, her voice cracked. "You thought he liquidated me?" Elliot's tone softened, though it was still tinged with pain. "I didn't know what to believe, Mom. I had no one to talk to, and you were gone." Their conversation underscored the lingering damage Lisa's disappearance had caused. It also reminded me of how much I valued the stability Jane brought into my life. When Jane graduated, it marked the end of our arrangement. I had tried to prepare myself, but my feelings overwhelmed me. I was deeply in love with her, and the thought of her leaving devastated me. One evening, she approached me holding a letter. Her expression was a mix of excitement and hesitation. "I've been offered a position with KPMG," she said quietly. "It's in London." "That's fantastic," I replied, forcing a smile. "You'll gain incredible experience there." Her eyes searched mine. So, you think I should take it? You should do what's best for you, I said evenly. Jane's voice trembled as she asked, Do you want me to go, Kevin? I took a deep breath. Our arrangement is over. This is your chance to explore the world and live your life. Her eyes filled with tears. Is that all I mean to you, an arrangement? I couldn't hold back anymore. Wrapping my arms around her, I pulled her close as she began to cry. You mean more to me than anything? I said softly. But I thought you want to find someone your age and build a future. She wiped her tears, then glared at me with fiery determination. Kevin Bryant, for such a smart man, you're clueless. I don't want someone my age. I want you. If you want me to leave, I will. But I'll stay if you want me. I stared at her, stunned. You'd give up this opportunity for me. Of course, she said firmly. I am in love with you, Kevin. I want to move my things out of that spare room tonight. Are you going to take me to bed and show me how much you love me? Without hesitation, I swept her into my arms and carried her to the bedroom. That night, we reaffirmed our love, and I knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. A few days later, Jane surprised me with news of another offer. The place I worked during the holidays wants to hire me, she said. The pay is lower, but I love the team. Bob offered you a job, I asked, surprised. He didn't mention that to me, she smiled. He did, and I'm taking it. The guy running design and development is quite the catch. I stared at her, hope rising in my chest. You're staying here? With me? Jane grinned. Of course. I've already made my choice, Kevin. I'm not going anywhere. Of course. I've wanted to stay since our first Christmas. I can't wait to have you as my boss, she teased. Meanwhile, my divorce from Lisa dragged on. Guy, my lawyer, informed me I'd need to appear in court to prove my efforts to locate her. The judge ordered another year of advertisements, this time focusing on Europe. On the courthouse steps, Detective Inspector Maynard greeted me with a smug grin. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Now I finally have a motive. Half your net worth is worth eliminating for. I shot back. The only reason I'd want Lisa back is to see the look on your face when you have to apologize. Over the next year, ads ran across Europe, but there was no response. Just occasional false leads. Maynard seemed uninterested, but I held on to hope that this chapter would eventually close. Finally, after a year, the court granted me a decree nisi, which would become absolute in 6 weeks. After 24 years, I was free. I briefly considered proposing to Jane, but she seemed content with our relationship as it was. We were happier than I'd ever imagined. The only lingering issue was my strained relationship with Elliot. Now married, he'd only invited me to the wedding because of Christine's insistence. She was level-headed and genuinely tried to mend things between Elliot and me, but progress was slow. Really, Mother, Elliot said to Lisa during one of their heated conversations. You couldn't expect everything to stay the same after you disappeared. Dad moved on. That meant divorcing you. But I was part of that marriage. Don't I get a say? Lisa protested. You had your say the day you walked out, Elliot replied firmly. I stayed silent, letting Elliot take the lead for once. Lisa turned to me, her tone sharp. Kevin, how did you manage to divorce me? As Elliot said, you effectively did it by leaving, I replied evenly. The court required me to give you every opportunity to claim your share. And did you? She demanded, her voice rising. Yes, I said calmly. I advertised in major newspapers across Britain and Europe. When you didn't respond, the court ruled that you'd abandoned your claim. Leaving your bank cards behind only reinforced their decision. Lisa's facade crumbled as she sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Elliot and I exchanged a glance but stayed quiet, letting her cry. When her sobs subsided, I broke the silence. Why are you here, Lisa? She wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. I'm in trouble. You were right about those people. They used me. After Henry left, I got tangled up with others who did the same. The last one left me in legal trouble. I thought I'd be safe here, with the only man I ever truly loved. You expected me to welcome you back? I asked coldly. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I hoped. I wanted to salvage our marriage, make you love me again. I shook my head. There's nothing to salvage. I loved you once, Lisa, but when you sided with Henry, I realized I was just a meal ticket to you. She broke down again, admitting, I thought success was about money, but I was wrong. Look at you, same house, same job. I could have been happy too. Elliot scoffed. You have no idea, do you? She looked confused as Bob handed me paperwork. A major telecom company had offered to buy Danvers Electronics at a price well above market value. They want a 5-year contract with you, Bob explained. You're the heart of the company. What about you? I asked. Are you selling? I'd like to retire, but the buyers won't keep the production staff. I can't do that to them. So you're not selling? I pressed. Not to them. I need a buyer who cares about the people here. I hesitated. Bob, I don't have that kind of money. You don't need it, he said. The bank will finance the deal. You'd own 85%, and I'd retain 15%. That night, I shared the idea with Jane. She smiled knowingly. You already know the answer, Kevin. You have to do it. The next day, Bob arranged a meeting with the bank, and I agreed. Word spread fast, and Sally, my assistant, approached me. Are you really buying the company? She asked excitedly. Looks that way, I replied with a grin. That's amazing, she said, hugging me. Everyone's been worried about Bob retiring. Not a word to anyone, I cautioned. We'll announce it once it's final. Over dinner, Jane and I discussed the deal. It's smart, she confirmed. The debt lowers the company's value temporarily, but as it's repaid, the value rises. It's a safeguard, not free money, but a solid move. By year's end, I was divorced and the proud owner of the company I dedicated my career to. Bob retired, embarking on another world cruise with Wendy. When the deal was announced, the employees cheered, and I felt immense pride as they lined up to shake my hand. Later, Elliot and Lisa exchanged sharp words. What's funny? Lisa snapped. You are, Elliot said, smirking. You always said Dad wasn't a millionaire. Turns out all it took was you leaving. That's enough, I interjected. It's true, Elliot countered. If money was her priority, she should have stayed. Lisa glared. Are you saying your father, who worked at some second-rate company, is rich now? That second-rate company is a leader in the global market, Elliot shot back. And Dad owns it. Lisa looked stunned. But you're still in this house. Why not upgrade? It suits me fine, I said calmly. And the Skoda? Replaced with a Jaguar. As Elliot left, he grinned. You'll be fine with Mom, right? I'll manage, I replied. Later, I found Lisa wandering the house, stopping at a framed photo of Jane and me. Who's the girl? She asked sharply. Jane Draper, I replied. She looks like your girlfriend. She's my fiancée, I said firmly. Her eyes widened. Fiancée? She's young enough to be your daughter. After my divorce, I hadn't planned to remarry, but Jane surprised me one evening. Kevin, she asked softly, would you want a baby with me? Caught off guard, I hesitated. Don't you think I'm too old? You're young at heart, she said, smiling. I want a family, I began pacing. I can't have a child unless we're married. Tears welled in her eyes. Kneeling beside her, I asked, Jane, will you marry me? Her face lit up. Does this mean we can start a family? Once we're married, so will you? Yes, she whispered, throwing her arms around me. The following day, we chose a ring. Her father was thrilled about the wedding, though her mother remained hesitant. A few weeks later, Jane handed me a prenuptial agreement. What's this? I asked. It's for your protection, she explained. People will call me a gold digger. I want you to know I'm marrying for love, not money. I don't want it, I replied. What's mine is yours. If we don't do this, I can't marry you, she insisted. Reluctantly, I agreed. The day I signed it, she set the wedding date. Elliot refused to be my best man, but Bob happily stepped in. The day before the wedding, Lisa appeared unexpectedly. So it's true, she said bitterly. You're marrying someone half your age. Jane and I have been together for over 5 years, I replied. If she wanted my money, she's had plenty of chances. Lisa bristled. And I get nothing while she gets everything? You made your choice when you left, Lisa. Don't blame anyone else. Tears streamed down her face. You're right. I've been a fool. I'm sorry, Kevin. I don't hate you, I said, softening. I'll help you on my terms. That night, I arranged for her to stay at a hotel and called Jane's father, Derek Draper. Can you help me get Linda to the wedding? I have an idea to change her mind. The next morning, Bob arrived. Let's grab breakfast, he said cheerfully. Over coffee, he asked. Any worries about today? 2, I admitted. Jane changing her mind, and Lisa. Jane adores you, Bob reassured me. As for Lisa, forget her. Today's about the future. By the time we reached Audley Manor, everything was running smoothly. The press stayed out of sight until the speeches, thanks to Bob. Guests arrived, and I heard Linda Draper call my name, looking radiant in her new dress. You look stunning, I said with a smile. Soon the wedding march began. Jane walked down the aisle on her father's arm, hesitating briefly when she saw her mother in the front row. She quickly composed herself and joined me. "How did you get my mom here?" she whispered. "I'll explain later," I replied, smiling. The ceremony was flawless, even during the speak now or forever hold your peace moment. When Jane lifted her veil, it took all my restraint not to kiss her immediately. During the photos, Jane squeezed my arm. "All right, spill it. How did you get Mom here, and where did she get that dress?" "There were some last-minute changes," I admitted. "It might steal a little attention from us." "I don't care," she said warmly. "I've got you, and both my parents were here." The reception began with heartfelt speeches. Derek spoke lovingly about Jane and welcomed me into the family. Bob's best man speech had everyone laughing. When it was my turn, I shared how Jane and I met and how much I loved her. Then, I surprised everyone. "Please welcome a special guest, Lisa, my ex-wife." Gasps filled the room as Lisa stood, surrounded by reporters snapping photos. I stepped in. "Gentlemen, this is Jane's and my wedding day. Please leave so we can celebrate. Mr. Danvers will provide Lisa's contact information." After the reporters left, the party resumed. Jane and I left for a hotel near Gatwick that night, then flew to St. Lucia the next morning. Though we'd shared rooms before, this night felt special. Our first as husband and wife. Sitting on the bed, I watched Jane step out of the bathroom in white lace lingerie, holding a small packet. She knelt, kissed me softly, then walked to the bin and dropped the contraceptive pills inside. Sliding into bed beside me, she whispered, "All right, Mr. Bryant, let's make babies." I smiled. "Sure thing, Mrs. Bryant." Her eyes sparkled. "What did you just call me?" she teased. "Mrs. Bryant," I repeated. "Say it again," she insisted, grinning. "Mrs. Bryant," I said with affection. That night was filled with love, and soon Jane's wish came true. She became pregnant, and we had our first child, followed by a second. Elliot also had 2 children, and our families grew close. Elliot's wife, Christine, helped repair our relationship. Elliot even took a pay cut to work for me, gaining insight into his past decisions' impact on employees. It brought us closer. Lisa's relationship with Elliot deteriorated. Christine insisted the kids needed their grandmother, keeping her somewhat involved. Eventually, Lisa sold her story to the press, earning over £100,000. Surprisingly, the article portrayed me positively while revealing scandals from her past. Jane's mother became a staunch supporter and, with Derek, moved closer to be near the grandchildren. Derek and I became close friends. Life was perfect. A loving wife, wonderful children, and a fulfilling career. For the first time, everything felt complete, and I intended to cherish every moment.